Good morning, everyone. I'm Sunil Garg, and with me here is Lane Swenka. And together today we will take a look at some of the new capabilities in vendor invoice functionality, which is going to be part of spring release. And we will also take a look at how the mobile scenarios are playing out in the context of vendor invoice. So basically, from a session agenda and objectives perspective, we'll take a look at, like I was mentioning, there is some new capabilities that we are introducing in the spring release around how you can import vendor invoices along with attachments through data entities, and then how you can take that integration flow throughout the UI and making it easy for an AP user or a business user to deal with that specific business process, and we'll take a look at the demo as well. And then in the last mile, how that can flow into the mobile experience as well. Now, Lane will talk about how they are using that capability and those feature set in their implementation projects as part of mcaConnect's implementation. And Lane will pick one case study and talk about how they are adopting that feature in that specific implementation. Then we can spend some time towards the end for Q&A, and we can go from there. So from a solution perspective, I think what is important to understand is, as of update 3, or before that, there was no capability to bring in attachments into AX or D365 for operations using data entities. Right? So in update 3, we added the capability in the platform to have a base entity that will allow anyone to use that to bring in attachments. Now, as part of the spring release, what we are doing is we have uptaken that platform capability into vendor invoice scenario, where now you can bring in vendor invoices along with attachments into AX. Now, the entity supports all the attachment types that AX natively supports, which is file, notes, URL, and any type of files as long as AX supports that. So that is one big enhancement to the vendor invoicing functionality, where you can bring in now attachments through data entities. Now, from a scenario standpoint, this opens up a lot of opportunities, right? I mean, one scenario could be you want to migrate data from a legacy system where you have vendor invoices in the legacy system along with a bunch of attachments. How do you get that in to AX? Now, with this capability now available in the spring release, you should be able to use the data entities and the data management framework itself to bring in invoices and the attachments along with that invoices. I'll talk a little bit more detail around what exactly happens when that import occurs and what all AX can do for us. So once the invoices are in AX, the next piece of functionality that we are enabling, again in the spring release, is for an AP user or anyone in the invoicing workflow to be able to see the attachments side by side on the AX invoice itself. Right? So a typical use case will be, another scenario here will be, let's say your organization has OCR capabilities to OCR paper invoices. Now, you could do it yourself, or you have a third-party service provider that actually does that for you. Now, the output now if you look at this diagram here, this is generically talking about how this flow can be used in an integration process. So you can imagine the OCR provider generating artifacts from the scanning process, and the artifacts will be an image of the invoice, the paper invoice, and also some metadata about the invoice, like header information. And if you have given all your master data to the OCR provider, then they can even do line-level scanning if that is possible for them to do. The point being, once those artifacts are generated, we need an easy mechanism to import them into AX. That is where the data entity enhancements comes into play, where there will be an integration layer, just like any other integration pattern that we have in D365 for operations. That integration layer is what the red line is in this diagram. And the integration layer will be responsible to take the artifacts either from the OCR provider or from the data migration process, and then convert those artifacts into the data package format that AX expects with this new capability, and then push into AX using the normal recurring integration pattern. And once AX gets that data package, AX will open the data package, understand which attachment belongs to which invoice, and I'll show you the data package also, how it looks like. And then it will go ahead and import those invoices. In the process, it is going to create pending vendor invoices automatically, and then it will also do the attachments for each of the invoices as they came in. So from an end user perspective, if you think about it, the recurring job runs, say, every night, where it pulls in vendor invoices from the service provider. Next day morning, the AP user comes in their workspace. They can see there are 5 new pending invoices, for example. They go and open the pending invoice, and they can see the attachment right there, side by side. They don't have to click on the paper clip to go into the document attachment form, and they don't have to select an attachment. They say open, it just opens up in a new browser window and whatnot, right? So that is another new enhanced capability, which is now going to be available in the Spring release. I'm not sure if you have noticed already that control is part of Update 3 platform. So if you go into the attachments form today in AX, you will actually see the new control in the document preview section. So we basically took that control and enhanced it to add additional functionality, which we can take a look at in a short while. And then the same control is now uptaken on the vendor invoice. So it is a platform capability. Anyone can use it. And Lane will talk to case studies where, as a partner, you can take that control and you can uptake that control or embed that control in any of your forms, right? For example, expense reports, if you want to embed that form, you can certainly do that to show the expense receipts, and so on and so forth. So that is the second capability that is part of the Spring release. The third feature set as part of this flow is exception handling. Right? So for example, invoices came in, you ran the data entity job, the invoices started to get imported, but few invoices failed because the vendor ID was invalid, the PO ID was invalid, or the currency was invalid. Something happened, and the data management framework just could not push the invoices to the target table, and it is just sitting in the staging table. It just failed, just like any other import job can fail, right? So today, when something like that happens, the user is required to go into the data management workspace. They should know which integration job resulted in that failure. Then they will go into the staging table from that job, and they have to fix the issues in the staging table, and they have to click save to target and whatnot, and that's how they manage that exceptions. What we are introducing in the Spring release, I'll put a fine print on this specific feature. I'll talk about that why. We are providing a business user-friendly exception handling capabilities for vendor invoice flow. What that means is, in the AP, I'll show you in the demo, but basically think about it as a list page which is sitting on top of the staging tables. And the list page has all business user-friendly controls. There is no such thing as push to target or entity sequence, or none of that jargon is used. It is residing in the AP module itself. The user can pin that into their workspace. So every day morning when they come, they can see, oh, there are 5 exceptions. They can click that. It goes into the list page. They can fix the error, and they can create the pending invoice right from there. So that is another enhancements that we are introducing. Now, the reason I said I'll say this with the fine print is because this specific functionality is currently in code review. So I'm not 100% certain if we will still hit the Spring release timeline, but that is our desire, and we are trying our best to make it as part of the Spring release. Only the exception handling piece. If it makes it, great. If it doesn't make it, then it will be post Spring release. So just take that into account. So with that, let me quickly jump into the demo. So the first thing I wanted to show is the new UI and the new controls artifacts that is there. So in AP module, once the exception handling, Oh, sorry. Lane, how do you switch that? Lane? The display is the slide. How do I? Oh, we have to duplicate.
Yeah.
I can duplicate.
Hit the exit on that.
I think now it should be fine. Thanks for calling out. I would have just gone. Okay, perfect. So in the AP module, you will start to see this new menu item under import failures, and it says vendor invoices that fail to import. And we'll. Yeah. The text is very small. Is that good? Okay, thank you. So that is one of the new UI that we will take a look at, which is vendor invoices that fail to import. The user can come here, and they can actually, look at. Right now, it is all clean. We'll import stuff, and then we'll see how it fails and how we can manage that. So now, let me directly go into the data management workspace. And right now, I have two import jobs, which I've already created, and I've already just loaded the data package. I have not imported that data package. I just did that to save time and so that we can focus on other important things. So I have two jobs here, and the scenario that we will take a look at is how can we import invoices in different legal entities, and what does that mean from an exception handling perspective? What are the scenarios that we can envision and enable through the exception handling UI? So I'm going to go into this project. And once the project opens, you will see this has three entities in this package. One is the invoice header entity, the other one is the invoice line entity, and the third one is vendor invoice document attachment entity. So this entity is a new entity in the Spring release, and this is what is going to enable us to bring attachments alongside with the invoices. Before I click import, I quickly want to show the data package itself. Lane, where is the data package?
The desktop and the AXUG.
Here. So I have two data packages here, one for USMF and one for USPI. If I were to just open it up, so you will see that this package has three entity Excel sheets, just like we saw in the workspace. One thing that is different is this package also has a folder called resources. And the resources folder is what will contain all the attachments. So when we talked about the integration layer that is responsible for taking artifacts and creating the data package, that has to make sure that it creates the data package in this format. The files here may look garbage based on the naming, and it is not associated to any software to open it. But this is, if I were to just change the extension of this file to say TIFF, because I know this is a TIFF file, and I double click, it will just open up as a TIFF image. So this is the real file. There is no transformation of any kind required on the file. It just looks gibberish because of the GUID and the extension not associated to any software. So this is how the zip looks like. And this package is already loaded into this job. I have not imported it. So let me quickly, and then I'll say import. So I have two invoices in this package. One is going to succeed and one is going to fail. So just as expected, one is pending because it failed. So now let me try to duplicate this so that we don't have to switch back and forth. So now in the accounts payable module, let me quickly go into the pending vendor invoices list page. So we'll see one invoice here, which came in with the invoice ID of USMF1. Now if I click edit, it's opening up, taking its own time. So this is the new control. It is trying to render the image. I'm not sure why it is not pulling up. I think there's some laptop issues here. So let me quickly show you another way to do this. So if I go into the attachments button, the standard document attachment capability, you see that the invoice came in with the attachment. The attachment was attached. This was a PDF. Now let me quickly add another attachment here manually. You may not have any image files.
PDFs, okay.
Well, let me show a note. Sorry, can you repeat the question?
When you showed us Windows Explorer, the attachment to the file name, I think it's a silly question about the file name. There's something about that file name that's associated with the...
No, yeah, so basically when you saw the file name as a GUID, that GUID is what is the link between the file and the invoice header for that attachment. So if I were to open up the invoice attachment entity Excel sheet, you will see invoice header ID and the GUID. That is how system knows what it is. So I'm just going to do a note here, and I'll say test note. Let's save this. And if I just refresh this page, now, apologies, there is a problem on this laptop with the PDF rendering. But what I can quickly show you is how you can actually change the attachments right from here itself. So if an invoice has multiple attachments, the user does not now have to go into the document attachment form and select the attachment, open it, and switch it. They can just switch it from here. And if I were to switch or select the note, I can see the note here. So this control supports all attachments type, including notes and URL. So this enables interesting functionality, right? For example, you may have a scenario where the customer has all the invoice images coming in through some other process, and it is sitting in their SharePoint site for their AP user to go and search for invoice images and do whatever they want to do. Now, they would still want to give a link to that invoice image file in the SharePoint as a URL. Now, you are now able to bring in URL through integration as data entity through the attachments entity, and then the URL will be available right here. So if I were to go here and add another attachment of type URL, it's invoice file link, and then here I'll just say, I'll just save it, close this, I'll refresh so that the new list gets loaded, and then when I click this, now I see the invoice file link. The user can select this. The URL is available right here. They can click and it will open up whatever was behind the URL. So this enables quite a few interesting scenarios from an integration standpoint, both from a legacy system perspective and also from an active integration from an invoicing process perspective. So this is part of the Spring release that you can take a look at. So we closed this pending invoices form, and now let me go into the exception handling piece. So I know that one invoice failed. So I want to go into the exception handling list page here. I can expand the preview, and I can see the error right here. I can also see the error here. So if the AP user is dealing with a bunch of exceptions, which should, in an ideal world, should not happen anyways, then the AP user can actually filter. Since it is available as a column, they can filter it and work on one set of exceptions, and then come back and work on different set of exceptions. And they can here see the full message, which is difficult to see in the list because of the width of the field. And then it shows the list of attachments that it came with. So this invoice came in with one image, and the invoice failed because there is some issue with the currency value. It says currency US does not exist. So it was supposed to be USD, but it came in as US. So now the user can click edit, and the form opens up. And this is how the side-by-side will show the attachments, right? The reason it is showing here is because this is a TIFF file, versus in the previous case it was a PDF, and there is an issue on this laptop to render PDF, so it did not show. But the TIFF image is rendering well. And let me quickly talk about some of the capabilities that is available here. So as a user, I can actually highlight certain parts of the image. So imagine AP user, AP clerk actually doing the initial screening of the invoices while they are fixing the errors. And they know that they want the next person in the review. It could be a tax review for all you know. The clerk wants the tax review person to actually pay attention to certain parts of the invoice. And hence they can just highlight. And if they want, they can also actually do annotation. They can say, take a look at this, for example. And they can actually save it back. So now this becomes, this is on the image now, and it will be available throughout the workflow where the user can see what needs to be done and what they have to do. Now, the other thing is they can, of course, zoom in, and they can zoom out, and they can fit to zoom. And if it's a multi-page TIFF, then there is a page changer here. They can switch between pages. This is the second page, whereas this is the first page, so they can do that. So all this capability is built into the control itself. If you are looking to uptake this control into your scenarios, you just have to uptake it. The uptake pattern is very, very simple, and Lane can talk about that. But once you uptake, all of this capability comes for free in your scenario as well. Yes, please. So the question is, does it keep the original image? So in this version, it does not. It is actually overwriting on the image itself. But we do realize and recognize the requirements and scenarios where we would need to maintain some kind of a version, but that is not in there yet. Now, to handle the scenario still, what the other capability that we have is all the editable controls, like, for example, highlighting and annotation. These are the controls that change the image. So these are actually tied to role-based security. So they have their own privileges. So you can actually control by assigning those privileges to your corresponding duty and telling them, hey, this role should not have this editable controls access, whereas the other role should be able to edit. So that way there is a capability for you still to enforce security, where you don't want a user in the workflow to make changes to the image, whereas they can still make changes to the invoice in AX because that is their job. Whereas another user in the workflow can, make changes to the image. So that scenario is enabled via tying the tools or the tool on the toolbar to role-based security. So now this is available in the exception handling also. Now I can expand the preview pane here as well, and the control, resizes itself automatically. And here as a user, I can know that, okay, the currency is an issue. So I can go and fix the currency. We'll fix that later because I want to show another scenario. So let me close this exception handling. Now let me go into another company. I'm just doing a quick time check. I'll switch my company to USPI. And if you notice, even from USPI, I can see the exception that happened in USMF, right? So that is another scenario that I wanted to talk about, which is in an enterprise, there can be shared services model that they follow, right? For example, Seattle office, for AP in the Seattle office will actually manage invoices for all the other branch offices. If that is the scenario, then this AP user should be able to manage the exceptions for different offices, which are represented as a different legal entity here in AX, for example, right? From this single screen itself, they shouldn't be required to change company and then do the processing of exceptions. The bottom line is, as we all know, the staging table is shared. It doesn't have a company column as restricted by the kernel. And this information is coming directly from the staging table on a nice UI. So by default, shared services scenario is enabled on the exception handling. But if somebody chooses to not to enable shared services scenario because in their company, every AP team manages their own exceptions, and there is no shared service, for example. We'll see how we can do that as well. But before that, I need to import some invoices in USPI. So we are in USPI. And let me quickly go into the data management workspace. And I have a job already for USPI, and the package is already loaded. And you saw the USPI package here. Even this has two invoices. One is going to fail and one is going to pass. So I'm going to load this project. And it is the same three entities. And I'm going to say import. So, as expected, one will fail. Yeah. Now, if we go into the exception handling, notice that I'm in USMF in this window, whereas I'm in USPI in the other window. So I can come here, and when I refresh, I'll see invoices from different companies. The exceptions from different companies in the same window. And using the company column here, the user can know which company this invoice belongs to. They can select, they can process the exception. We'll take a look at that just now, and they can go from there. Now, before I go and process exception, how to manage the other scenario, whereas AP user should only manage exceptions in their company and not in the other company. So this is a standard DIXF functionality where you can actually enforce security on a job. So the scenario is USPI company only allows USPI users to manage their exceptions. So we want some kind of restriction on the USPI exceptions. So basically, if that is a requirement, they would go into the job when they schedule the job for recurrent integration, and they can say applicable legal entities. And by default, every job has all. We'll just delete this. And we'll create a new rule that says it is only for USPI. We'll save this. And now when I come in USMF and when I refresh, I will only see USMF exceptions because the company said that only USPI users can manage USPI exceptions. So this is another scenario that is enabled out of the box where the users can manage the way they want in terms of how to manage exceptions. Now let's quickly go and create or process exceptions. So I'm going to click Edit, and we made the changes earlier. That is all saved here. And we just have to go and fix this currency here. I'll say USD. I'll say create pending invoice. So this is another thing that I was mentioning, that these things makes the UI much more business user friendly, as opposed to having a label that says save to target, where the user does not know what target is. We have made sure that it is reflecting the vendor invoice jargon as much as possible. So it says, pending invoices created successfully. So now if I go into the pending invoices list page, we'll see 2 invoices. USMF2 also has come in, along with, if I click edit, you will see the same modified image in the side-by-side for this user on the AP team. So the same image came in, and the workflow can continue. So this experience is available throughout the invoicing workflow. And once the invoice is posted, it is also available in the invoice inquiry journal. So there may be a need for a user to look at the images and attachments on posted invoices. So if they go into there, I don't have a currently posted invoice, so I cannot show you, but if you go into the list page for invoice journal inquiry, you select, the control comes up right on the list page itself. And as you change your selection, the image will refresh, the attachment will refresh based on what invoice is selected. So that is the end-to-end flow. Yes, question? Exactly. So this is the scenario could be a non-PO invoice. But if it was a PO invoice, the entity supports PO number, so you could have the PO number, at which point it will do the linking of the PO and the invoice. So I know we are running out of time. The last thing I wanted to show is the last mile functionality of vendor invoice mobile approval. So I'll switch to my phone, and hopefully everything should still continue to work. Okay, perfect. So, how many of you have seen the mobile sessions in the last 2 days? Okay, quite a few. So, this is the capability that will be available in the spring release as well. The mobile invoice approval app is going to be available in the spring release, and that is what we are going to see here. Now, I have purchase order also, because we are working on purchase order approval app as well. And we are planning to release that also for spring, but don't take my word right now because it is still in development phase. So I'm going into my approvals, and I'm going to my vendor invoices. I have 2 vendor invoices assigned to me right now. I can go into one invoice and I can see the details. This shows me it has 1 line, and it is trying to pull additional information from the back end. I can see the coding. It is coded to this ledger account and this dimension. I'm actually going fast because of lack of time, and I want Lane to cover the case study. And then I can actually take workflow actions here, and I can say approve. I can say done. It is actually syncing the change right now. And if I refresh, so that invoice is no more in my queue. It is now workflow processed. And behind the scene, this is all standard AX workflow. There is nothing different about mobile aspect to this. And if the workflow is configured for the invoice to go to Lane, for example, it would have gone to Lane. And if Lane had a mobile device and he had the same app installed, he can just take the action same. So this is something that I quickly wanted to show. Yes, question, please. Sorry, what was that? What capability? Yes, so the mobile framework itself has offline capabilities. Yeah, so all the app that we build on top of that will get it for free. So the other important thing before I give it over to Lane is so invoice automation availability. The data entity enhancements we talked about is already available. It will be available in Spring. It's already checked in. The attachments viewer functionality we saw, it will be available in Spring. Exception handling is something that we are not sure at this point. We are trying our best to make it part of the Spring release. If not, it will be post-Spring release. Invoice mobile approval. if you are able to wait till spring release, great. You will get the app in the spring release along with all the platform changes that are required. But if you are on 16.11 build and you are on update 3 and you still want access to it, then you have to apply these hotfixes that are available. A couple of them are platform hotfixes for update 3, and one of them is an app hotfix for 16.11. And once you install that, you will be able to build your own mobile app. I'm not going to cover how to build the mobile app. There were sessions for that, but we can always sync up offline. Send me a note, and I'll be happy to work with you to make you adopt this functionality. So I'll just hand off to Lane before any other. Elaine, you want to take up?
Thank you. Okay. So I get to talk about a recent project that we launched back in September on AX7 RTW. We're closely coming up on a new launch for 1611 for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, based right here in Seattle. For those of you who don't know, they're a not-for-profit organization. They do a lot of different philanthropic initiatives. Just very humbling project to be on, where financial dimensions that they have are talking about curing polio and feeding the hungry and things like that. So just a really neat organization, a unique project for me because there's no inventory, no customers, no manufacturing or anything like that. They are essentially all payables. And it's very serious what they do. Their invoices, if they're late, it could be life or death for certain people. So a great use case for streamlining accounts payable and working with invoice and OCR. The Gates Foundation, they work with a vendor out of the East Coast, I believe, called Datros, and they are an OCR vendor. Oh. Okay, very good. Yep, thanks. They are working with an OCR vendor called Datros. They do all of the scanning for all of their invoices, and they work with a specification called an X200 file. So in this file, all of the invoice information is in there, anything that they can scan, including the vendor account number, invoice numbers, amounts, purchase orders if we had those. I'm not sure if any of you have worked with OCR before, but it's not exactly an exact science. If there was coffee on the vendor number, then that's not coming over, kind of thing. So dealing with the exception handling is pretty important as well. One thing that we've done for the Gates Foundation is that the entire project is extensions. So we have zero overlayering. We've taken everything that Microsoft has provided as a basis, and we've extended that. So one area that we've extended this process is the data package. So like we saw with Sunil's demo, there was the data package, and around that we've put a RESTful API so that the Datros process that's based heavily on this XML package can just easily transform that into JSON and send that into AX. At the end of the day, it still is populating the same data entities that are provided by Microsoft, including the new attachment entity. And so that's how the invoices are streamed in with all of the rich metadata that the scanning service provides. Let's see, another area that we've kind of extended on is the multi-threading. So this is, again, just using the base framework that is the data management framework. You can thread all of your jobs. So if you have 5,000 invoices that are coming in every 2 hours, it's not going to take an entire business day to process those. We've actually done some pretty significant stress testing of the system. I believe we were using about 8 jobs. Each job had about 500 invoices, and that was taking about 10 minutes to process. So it's a very efficient system that Microsoft has provided us. I'm getting kind of nerdy here, huh? So the exceptions, like I mentioned before, so this is critical for the foundation. Like we saw before, they can see side by side for any given Datros exception. We've extended some of the labels to make it more friendly for their AP team, but they can easily filter on any invoice number, legal entity, vendor account, invoice. All of the metadata is there. They can see it side by side. And the richness of PDFs come in very, very cleanly. The TIFFs, some of that just depends on which vendor you're using for OCR. If it gets scanned more than once, every time you scan an image, it just gets worse. So working with the vendor on that has been very fruitful for the foundation. But they have, like we mentioned, through security, a completely separate team that's doing this kind of initial triage of any invoice issues. They can quickly come in here and fix the problem, click the button, and off it goes to become a pending vendor invoice. We just kind of touched on mobile. We're in the process of rolling that out throughout the foundation, so we're just starting to get our feedback, and hopefully they all give it a 10 here like I just did, but I'm not trying to do anything subliminal. But they have folks all across the world that are going to do this process. China, Ethiopia, South America, all over the U.S. So they're going to be hitting this system across the globe 24 hours a day. And so, again, just another great use case for us, a great use case for this process.
And Lane, can you talk about the side-by-side control being uptaken in other forms?
Yeah, absolutely. So even if I go back here, this is that exception grid. They also wanted to just have the side-by-side immediately before jumping into a given invoice. I think once you show your users the side-by-side process or this control, they'll want it in a lot of different areas. On the PO would be a great place. I could imagine that being uptaken on manufacturing orders, bonds, being able to see an engineering spec, things like that. So.
Are we doing anything on the payments form, uptaking the control on payments?
It is on the payments, I believe. They have pulled that into the marking transactions. Okay. So for a given payment line, they can look at the settlement and see all of the images there as well. So it's kind of proliferating throughout the system. That was a whirlwind.
Any further questions on the process or the features, functions? Yes, yeah. Please.
Yeah, just with the mobile app, can you change the accounting or can you suggest changes to the accounting?
So the question is, on the mobile app, can we change accounting or suggest changes? So that's a good question. So the mobile app, right, the one that I demoed is a read-only version of the mobile app. Now the mobile framework allows you to build edit scenarios as well. So you can go and build a version which is going to be very easy to make certain fields of the invoice editable. But when it comes to accounting, that is currently read-only. So you will not be able to change accounting directly in the mobile device, but can you suggest, not through the mobile application itself, you will have to tell offline, go and change that. The other option could be when you take an action, you can type in the comment, and in that comment you can say, please go and change so-and-so, if that works for that specific scenario. But the answer is, no, you cannot edit the accounting through the mobile app. Any other questions?
Yep.
So this is an integration with Datros from an external site. Is that data coming through the CDS environment, or how is that being housed?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, so the question was, with this integration with Datros, how is what's the web call that they're making, or how are they getting that into the system? Right now, what we built was that RESTful API, so it's just an X++ service that they call that essentially streams in the data package.
Okay, is there any plan to move towards the CDS instead of the web service? Or?
Not at current. Not at current.
So currently, and you can add more to this. So Foundation uses Dell Boomi as the integration layer. So that layer is responsible for marshalling the data from the provider to AX. And currently, so they have chosen that platform for integration. So
yeah, very similar to BizTalk.
Yeah.
It's just a Dell product. Yep.
Yes, please.
In the back.
Yeah. Yeah. So is the question around the purchase order mobile? So that is currently in development. So basically we are working on enabling the same approval scenario for purchase order also. So there is no reason to not to have on purchase order if we have it on invoice. Sorry? Yeah, so the answer is yes. There will be a purchase order approval app coming soon. We are trying that to make it part of the spring release. If that is not happening, then it will come after that. But yes, that is currently in work in progress.
So what about the vendor collaboration with like the new ways that vendors can go and put their invoices up? Would there be a way to kind of pull that information through and use this process along with that?
So the question is, there are new ways for vendors to come in and enter their invoices in AX. How does that process gel with this specific process? Now, when they input the invoices from wherever they come in, it will go into the pending invoices flow. It will not come into the exception handling because they're entering the invoice, they are probably doing it right, and that functionality itself will have error handling capabilities where it will not push the invoice into the staging table. The staging table is really for invoices coming through data entities, not for any other mechanism to feed into the staging table. So that will be the process, and it will flow through the pending invoices, at which point both the scenarios converge at the pending invoices list page. Yes, please.
Will highlighting and annotation also be available on PDFs?
The question is annotation and highlighting available on PDFs? The answer is no. It is only available, that's a good question. It is only available on image files of all image types like JPG, PNG, TIFF. That doesn't matter, but it is not available on PDF. Good question, good call out. It will not be, there are some licensing issues, which is why we are not able to enable that, but that's a good call out. Yes, please, first.
When you import the invoice package that you were showing in the beginning, once it's processed, does it disappear? Or it remain there, and if you try again, then you'll have error messaging, you already imported that package? How do you handle
Good question. So the question is, what happens if I import the same package twice or more than once? So it will come in as new invoices, and that's a great call out to understand the design of the vendor invoice entity itself. So since you asked that question, I'll go a little bit deeper from a technical perspective also. So the way the vendor invoice header entity is designed is every time it imports an invoice, even if you had invoice ID in your Excel template, that invoice ID means nothing for the data entity. Internally, it generates a new unique identifier, which we do not know, but it is exposed in the UI after it is imported. And that unique identifier is what maintains the uniqueness for the invoice in AX. Now, if you were to import the same data package again, it is going to create a new unique ID, and the same invoice gets created twice. So to avoid that happening, if the data package gets updated using the unique ID itself, then that scenario becomes an update scenario. Because when the data package gets imported, which has a unique ID which is already there in AX, it knows that, oh, this invoice is already there, let me go and update. So it switches into an update mode. But if you do not update the data package with a unique ID and keep importing the same package, it will keep on creating the same invoice again and again. There was one question there. I saw some, yes. Sorry, what's that? So the question is, are the attachments available in the mobile app? The answer is yes, but it is read-only. You cannot add attachments, but if there is an attachment, you can actually view it. And I'll talk a little more about that. So the moment you say, I want to open this attachment, at that point, we leave the control to the native mobile device itself. So if, for example, on iPhone, Safari is the default viewer for TIFF images, for example. So it will just open Safari because we don't control that. But if you go into your iPhone and associate that with a different app, then that app will automatically get called because we just leave the control back to the OS, and that will take care of it. Yes, please. So the question is, for the side-by-side viewer, are you using the native browser's capability? So if you know the standard, I should not say standard, but the document viewer control which was there before we made these changes is what is being used. So that uses the WAPI control to actually render images and PDFs and whatnot. So that is exactly what we are also using because we just took that control and we added on top of that control. So there is no changes to how that is working or has been working so far in AX. There was some No. Any more questions? Yes, please.
Obviously, this is an integration with the OCR provider. Is there any future developed by Microsoft to actually have OCR capabilities?
To be quite honest, I'm not the right person to answer or comment on that. But if you have already met Annette Brewer, she is the program manager for vendor invoices. So you should, talk to her or send her an email. She would know the latest, and what she can share, she will definitely share with you. Any other questions before we wrap up the session? Yes, please.
Was the OCR vendor you guys used recommended by you guys, or did you already have it in place?
That was already in place.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that one was already in place.
Thanks, Lee.
Yep.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, please.
This approval process, is it a AX workflow or it's a flow?
It is standard AX workflow. Yeah, there's no changes from that point of view. Okay, I think we can wrap up the session. Thank you all for joining the session.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.